Hi, welcome to a special episode of TFT Hyper Roll where I want to try something a little different than I've done before. My kid suggested that it might be helpful to people to have a video with multiple builds in it where I break down the builds into their key component. I think it's very important for any player who wants to climb to have certain builds memorized so that they can recognize what the game is trying to tell them and help them get a better build early so they can place higher. These builds are not in any particular order from worst to first or anything like that. They're all equally good. And before I start, please, I ask you to feed the algorithm gods, throw a like on the video. It's mission for tuition so we can help pay for our son's middle and high school tuition. I'm going to stop there because I don't want to take up too much time with that explanation. And with that, let's get started. So I think it's pretty obvious. I'm going to start this video with skirmishers. If it is at all possible, I love to try to get a skirmisher with a key item right off the bat. For example, here is an Olaf with a Negatron cloak. So you already are part way to creating your item holder. Similarly, you might find an Udyr with a recursive bow. Same concept. You have the right champion with the right item. Another factor to consider are what champions are you getting out of the NPC round. When you pick up something like an Irelia that is an early 2-cost skirmisher, you really want to consider heading in that direction. Sometimes you'll even get a 3-cost out of the NPC round, and at that point you really want to push in that direction because the game is giving you a good jump on that. But of course that's only if the items fit. Let's talk about the 3 key items. There's the Bloodthirster, which is the BF sword and the Negatron cloak. The Runan's Hurricane, which is a recursive bow and a Negatron cloak. And finally, the Rapid Fire Cannon, which is 2 recursive bows. So overall, you're going to need 3 recursive bows, 2 Negatron cloaks, and a BF sword to make this work. But it's really important. Do not force it. If you don't have 3 skirmishers, don't necessarily rush to slam the items on. But if you have it, slam them on and get ready to go. For Radiant items, go with what you need. If you don't have something like in this case the Rapid Fire Cannon, pick up the Radiant version of that. However, if you haven't had the Bloodthirster and it doesn't offer it to you, get a healing item like the Fist of Fairness. But one of the most important things to know about Skirmisher is when to roll. You want to hold on until you're in level 7. At that point, each roll has a 15% chance of getting a 4-cost, and without Jax, this build is likely going to fall apart. You might be able to hold on for a little while, but you're going to start losing very quickly and not be able to recover if you don't have Jax in your build. The moment you find your Jax, take out your item holder, put Jax in. The item holder could be Udyr, it might be Olaf. Overall, it's going to be a 1-cost skirmisher who's holding the items for Jax. For positioning in this build, overall, you want a tanky frontline. Lee Sin, Irelia, possibly Rel, or some Sentinels as I had in this particular game, but a tanky frontline, Jax further back. With the Blessed Rapid Fire Cannon, I was able to keep Jax in the back row, but normally I'd have him next to Cannon. Then Nidalee off in a corner, and somebody else in the opposite corner, just to have damage coming from all directions. Your goal is to make Jax strong and allow him to do most of the work. If you can get to a 2-star Jax, you're likely going to be competing for 1st or 2nd. Even at 1-star, this will often carry you into the top 4. And with that, let's move over to our second build, which is Dawnbringers. Now, Dawnbringers is not a meta build. It's not one I would suggest even pushing for off the carousel. However, if you get an early 2-star Dawnbringer, or the game decides to give you a 3-cost Dawnbringer, I would certainly consider moving into it. But you have to make sure you have the right items. So let's assume the game has given you a clear sign that this is the way to go. What items do you need? In a perfect world, I like to have a Hextech Gunblade for healing, a damage item such as the Rabadon's Death Cap or a Jeweled Gauntlet, and then a mana item such as the Blue Buff or the Spear of Sojin. Of course, with any of these, you can take their Radiant equivalent and they will work just as well. But the most important takeaway from that is that if you are not seeing a bunch of needlessly large rods early, get away from Dawnbringer. It's not going to work out for you because Karma is your carry, and she needs those items for her to be strong. I like to use Brand as my item holder for this build because he casts early and often, and so he is a good stand-in until you can get Karma. Since Karma is a 4 cost, I like to try and hold as much gold as possible until level 7 so that I can then roll down to find her. Once you have her, make the item swap as soon as possible, get her in, and hopefully that will bring you up to the 6 Dawnbringers, which is likely the most you're going to get unless you happen to get a spatula and a giant's belt, which will make the Dawnbringer buff. To fill in around her, you especially want to try to find Ivern because he's going to tick 2 additional boxes, which will be Invoker and Renewer, which will help with both Soraka and with Karma in allowing her to cast faster and Soraka to heal health and gain mana faster. You also want to pick up an additional Brawler, either Nunu or Volibear if you can get him, because that will give Gragas more health and allow them more time. But it's a very flexible build if you have the Karma items. There's a lot you can do with it, and I recommend going for it if you see those early champions and have the right items. And with that, it's time to move on to our next build. This is a build that's really strong, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend trying to push for it in Hyper Roll, unless you manage to get the key champion out of the NPC round. And that champion is Nocturne, and this build is Assassin Brawlers. And the reason I'm not just calling it Assassins is I've found that pairing the Assassins up with the Brawlers is the most logical way to go, especially in Hyper Roll. There's a natural synergy between Gragas and Kha'Zix since they're both Dawnbringers, so that will help enhance their buff. And then as you get towards endgame, there's a natural synergy between Volibear and Nocturne because they're both Revenants, so allowing Volibear into the game will allow Nocturne to come back from the dead and continue to do damage. From a champion rolling perspective, this build is pretty easy. You just keep rolling and picking up any Brawler and any Assassin you can find. There are multiple 1 costs, 2 costs, 3 costs, so you do not have to wait until 4 for your carry to be strong. Your carry is going to be Nocturne, and you're going to want to surround Nocturne with as much support as possible. Items, on the other hand, are absolutely key. However, as far as I'm concerned, there's only one absolutely essential item for Nocturne, and that is the Rage Blade. And it is so important that even if you can make it early, I would suggest waiting until the Radiant item comes out before you commit. And the reason for this is Nocturne's passive. He will do additional damage every 3rd attack and heal himself for 100% of the damage dealt, which means attack speed is absolutely key. The faster he's hitting, the faster he has every 3rd attack, the faster he heals himself, the more people he takes down. Once you have a Rage Blade, the other items are literally mix and match. You can do a Death Blade, a Giant Slayer, Infinity Edge, Last Whisper in pretty much any combination. They will all increase the damage, which will increase his healing, which will keep him up longer and allow him to take more targets down. It's a pretty fun build, and I suggest you try it if you get that early Nocturne. And this brings me into our 4th build. Remember, no particular order, no one is really better than another, but this is Redeemed. This is a lot like Dawnbringer in that it is not something I go for off the carousel. However, if I get a lot of early Redeemed characters, especially if I get the chance to put a Sunfire Cape on Leona, I am going to lean into this build and see what I can do with it. An early Sunfire Cape on top of the Redeemed buff is very strong for the early part of the game. Winning early is important with Redeemed because it can sometimes lag mid-game as you're between that 3 and 6 Redeemed and you don't yet have your carry, which is Vel'Koz. Now what I'm about to say is going to sound very familiar because it's about the same as Dawnbringers. There are some very key items. Number 1 is the Hextech Gunblade. You need that for healing on Vel'Koz. You also need Spear of Sojin, and then a damage item which can either be Rabadon's Death Cap or Jeweled Gauntlet. Blue buff does not necessarily work, since Vel'Koz has a much higher mana threshold. Much like Dawnbringers, you can use Brand as your item holder, and then hold as much gold until 7, and that's when you roll to try to find Vel'Koz and make your team strong. Presuming you don't get a redeemed emblem, there are lots of ways you can round your team out. You can pick up an extra Invoker in Karma that will help Syndra cast faster, or push Mystics if you're facing a lot of magic damage. Overall, it's a very versatile and easy comp to use, provided you have the right items. And now to the final comp in our little rundown that I like to call my build of fundamental evil. It is 4 Abominations and 4 Revenants, and it is both deliciously simple and incredibly complicated all at the same time. It's easy because it's right in the name, Abomination and Revenant. It's difficult because it's very specific how you have to build it. You can try and force it right off the top by grabbing a champion with the right item, like a Callista with a recursive bow or a Callista with a Negatron cloak. Either one will do. The other option usually gives me a little more confidence in the build, and that is that I get a 3 cost out of the NPC round, and that allows me to know, okay, I'm going to have Nunu really early on, and it will be easy to build my Abomination. There are really only 2 key items in this build. First, you need to get the Runan's Hurricane onto Callista. That is a must. After that, you want some type of healing item on Brand. Often that can be Hand of Justice or Bloodthirster, but you want that healing item because that will go onto the Scion that pops out of the grave. For Radiant items, you want a tank item that is going to go onto Nunu. Literally any decent tank item will do because it will end up appearing twice on the same board, and that will make your board extra tanky as your Abomination comes out. Once you have your main 3 in place, it's time to just continue to roll and hope. You're looking for Revenants along with your Abomination characters, and that's because Fiddlesticks, who is the 4th Abomination, is also a Revenant. And this is ultimately why I call it my build of fundamental evil, because there's something to me fundamentally evil about things popping out of graves and coming back from the dead to kill you after you've already killed them. The build is very strong, and it's really good at getting you into the top 4, but it does not guarantee a win, especially after the nerfs that Riot put in a few weeks ago. This game we're watching the ending of was from around that time, before they nerfed Tristana, but after they had nerfed Abomination, but it still got me into 3rd place, which isn't bad, because you're still going to gain points, and sometimes those point gains are really, really important, because they come at exactly the right time. Thank you for watching. Hope this video was helpful and that you have an absolutely awesome day.